Okay, here I'm going to do the same flight from Seattle to Portland, only this time in the 747. Once again, I've set everything up ahead of time with the loading the flight plan, getting all the takeoff data in, which I'm not going to cover in this video. So this will just be for the flying part. So we'll set 22,000 as our altitude, assuming we've been cleared straight up to that. The way the takeoff works in the 747 is you push the power up to about 50%. When that's stable, then you hit the takeoff go-around button, which is down here on the throttle quadrant. It's these buttons right here. In the PMDG, they've set a mouse hotspot, so if I click on this little screw right here, that's kind of the same as hitting that button, so it just makes it a little more user-friendly. Once I do that, it will automatically set the takeoff power based on the flex temperature that I set, and I will physically push my throttles all the way up to maximum. And that's just a sort of an artificial thing that you do with the PMDG 747 so that your physical throttles don't get out of alignment with what the auto throttles are doing. And then when I have the descent and it starts to pull the power, I will pull those all the way to idle, and I won't touch them again until land. So those are really the only two times I touch the throttles. So make sure our parking brake is off, and it is. Let's turn off these bright interior lights. Well, everything off. I'll push the throttles up. So here you can see the throttles. The engines look good. So I've hit the hotspot, and you'll see thrust reference, takeoff, go around, all that stuff are the indications there, and my speeds are written on here for my V1 and rotate, which happen to be the same in this case. So there's V1 and rotate. Airborne, and I'll pull the gear up. So here's the flap setting for 5, so I'll set the flaps to 5. I'm still flying by hand. I'm following the flight director, so I'm trying to keep these needles centered here. Do the flaps to 1. You'll see that the airspeed target is 250 knots, which is airspeed below 10,000 feet. Okay, and I'll turn on the autopilot. So I click autopilot, VNAV and LNAV are engaged. It doesn't matter which autopilot I turn on, but you can't turn on all three. If you turn on another one, it switches to that one. So it's something to watch out for. I'll bring the flaps all the way up now. I see it's aiming for that 250 knots. It keeps the power in, and then it raises the nose and climbs faster. It doesn't pull the throttles back to try and hit 250 knots. It uses the pitch of the aircraft. This is kind of how all these airliners work. Okay, checklist is done. Landing gear's up, flaps are up, and the next checklist will be for descent. Set the range out a little bit further here so you can see where we're going. Here's our predicted top of climb. This green arc is our live prediction for the top of the climb. So you can kind of always watch on here to see whether or not you're going to make your climb or your descent using this interactive display. get to 10,000 feet, we should expect that this target airspeed will change to our optimum climb speed, and the airplane will nose down and accelerate at the same thrust setting to get to that speed, and then it will pick the nose back up again to maintain that speed in the climb. And when I pass 10,000 feet, I'll bring in all the landing lights and everything. We'll get a little bing here at 10,300 if you listen for it. That's sort of a little reminder to bring in the lights. And you'll see it's now set a target airspeed of 332. And the plane has nosed over. We'll maintain just a minimal climb until we hit our target speed. Accelerate, and then it will pitch up to maintain that speed and continue our climb up to 22,000. You'll see, since we're barely climbing now, that interactive altitude predictor was off scale, and now we're starting to climb again, and you'll see it's coming in much closer to us. We've got an FMC message right here. Reset MCP altitude. So that means for this flight, it thinks we should already be thinking about descending because it's such a short flight. I'm just going to keep climbing now, just in the interest of demonstration purposes. So I'll clear that. Kind of like the expedite, I could pick a flight level change, and I could choose a lower speed, set 280, and now keeps the throttles up, but it pitches us up to slow down, so we're able to expedite our climb. So it's kind of like the expedited climb in the Airbus. We're about to pass 18,000 feet. You'll see that this altimeter setting here will change, indicating that we need to be in standard. And when you click standard, you'll see STD here. So see, flight level change went off. Because we're approaching our altitude. Now it's switched to just maintaining the speed that we had set in there. So what I'll do is I'll turn VNAV back on. That sets a target speed of 284, VNAV, leveling at 22,000. I'll assume that we're cleared to descend all the way down to the 2,000 feet, so I'm going to set this to 2,000. And click it. Throttles will go to idle. And this magenta marker here shows where we are on our calculated descent path. This is also showing us where we are on our calculated descent path. This has gone full scale, so we get some numbers here. It says we're about 1,000 feet above our optimal descent path, and that's because I didn't descend when the autopilot wanted me to, so we're a little bit high. But you can also see that it's coming down, so the plane is descending and it's making up for that altitude, and it will get back on the predicted optimum descent path. But we could also use flight level change, kind of like the expedited descent or the expedited climb. So if I do flight level change, and in this case I say, hey, let's let this thing speed up to 340, for example. Now it's going to pitch over to seek this speed, which will increase our rate of descent. And you'll notice that we're very quickly catching back up to our optimal profile. There's our optimal profile right there, so that expedited descent worked. So I'll just turn VNAV back on. 18,000. I'll go back to standard altimeter, default altimeter. So now we're a little over 1,000, 1,200 feet below our profile because of that expedited descent. So what the airplane will do is it will shallow our descent rate. We'll let our speed decay to the optimum until it recaptures our descent profile. We'll go in here into our performance page. It's now for the approach reference. I'll set, clicking on this, I'll say we're going to land with 30 degrees of flaps and 141 knots. So now 141 knots will be what we'll see right down here in our ref speed. 30 flaps, 141 knots. So here at Helens, we're supposed to be at or above 11. At Crater, supposed to be between 10 and 13. At Hiker, between 9 and 7. And at Voodoo, we should be at 5,000. But our next altitude restriction is this one right here. Our next speed restriction on this star is 210. But we will need to decelerate to 250 knots below 10,000 feet, which it's predicting looks like it's going to happen right there. You can see it's got us right back on that descent profile again, and it's gradually slowing down to that target speed to make that descent profile. We'll do an automatic landing. You'll see that we'll have all three autopilots will be on for redundancy for our Cat 3 landing. When we're turning in to intercept the localizer, I'll use the localizer button to arm localizer capture, and I'll use the approach button here to arm glide slope capture. Zoom in our display here. The data button gives us information about our altitude restrictions on the way if we want to see it there. With the Airbus, you need to put the FMC into arming the approach phase, and that's when it starts controlling the airspeeds. With the Boeing planes, you tend to control the airspeeds more manually by taking over the speeds and controlling them. You can get some automatic speed settings by just letting it control the airspeed through the FMC, and at different flap settings you will get different target airspeeds. But it's often a more manual procedure with the Boeings, so if it looks like you're going to be a little bit high, you might slow down early or something like that. Use this manual speed control, maybe to get down to where you can put more flaps down to have more drag or whatever it takes to be on your approach. It's usually a good idea to keep your heading bug aligned with your flight path so that if you lose autopilot for any reason and you need to switch to heading, you'll be going the direction that you're going right now instead of veering off in some crazy direction or having to reset it when you're busy trying to figure out why you lost your autopilot. This is different than the Airbus, where you don't really have control over your heading bug if you aren't actually using it to steer the plane. You can see I can sort of set this heading bug wherever I want, but unless I click this to take over, that's not going to be what's controlling our flight path. If I do click it, you see, like if ATC said turn left to 148, I would do something like that, which means our lateral nav is off. Turn lateral nav back on. Now it's going to go back to flying this GPS route. Coming up on 10,000 feet. Let's go ahead and put our lights out. So we have a new target speed of 240. Definitely make sure that we're under 250 when we're below 10,000 feet. Here's our little chime to remind us that we're about to go through 10,000 feet. Okay, we were definitely between 13 and 10 when we hit crater. Now for hiker we need to be between 9 and 7. Hit our target airspeed, so now the airplane can pitch down a little bit. So you'll see our rate of descent will increase. We're right on profile, so that means there should be no trouble making those altitude restrictions. Nice long runway, so I'll set the auto brakes at 3. There's plenty. I'll arm the spoilers. Run the checklist. Auto brake is set. Landing date is in there. Altimeters are set. Speed brake's armed. All that's left is get our gear down and get our flaps to 30 before landing. So I'll demonstrate controlling the speed. So what I do is left click this. Now that's showing me the target speed. I lower this to say 210. See that it's set to 210 now. The airplane will pitch up a little bit and try and slow down to maintain that speed. And we can still monitor whether we're on our profile or not. You can see the flap limits here are we've got plenty of headroom, so we'll go ahead and put down just one notch of flaps. Now you'll see I can see what the airspeed limit is for one notch of flap, so can't go below 200. Shouldn't have gone below 220 with no flaps. So it gives me a little bit of drag, not too much. Zoom in again. So it says we're still on profile to achieve our 5,000 in Voodoo. Voodoo's 7 miles away. We're doing about 4 miles a minute. So it's going to go 2 minutes. 1,000 feet per minute. We're going to lose about 2,000 feet. That's plenty to get down to 5,000. Okay, we slow it down to 210. So now it'll maintain that. Here comes the bug for 5,000 feet. So you notice it's set to 2,000. You notice that the limit's 5,000, so it will level us off and maintain our target speed. I'll go ahead and put down another notch of flaps, so this will go from 1 to 5. You see there's our target airspeed now for 5 flaps. Let's put this halfway in the middle. Cabin's ready. Auto brakes on 3. Speed brakes armed. Okay. See the throttles are coming up to capture this airspeed and to level us at 5,000 until we've passed. Zoom in again. Okay, past Voodoo. Our next altitude restriction is 3,100 feet. 210 knots, we're already below that, so that's all fine. Power's coming back. Descending on profile. With that at about 3,100 feet. Like I mentioned before, when we turn in here, we'll arm the localizer. You can see IPDX, 104 degrees inbound, 12 miles DME right now. When we do intercept the localizer, one thing you'll notice is that this heading bug will slew around to the inbound course automatically. And we'll get the plane configured once we're headed inbound from Hearn. Predicting we'll crash nut at about 4,000 feet, which does seem to be accurate. Turning now to head toward Hearn. Go ahead and arm the localizer. See, we have localizer indication and a glide slope indication. These are a little above the profile now. So here, pull the throttles back, descending down to get to that 3100. Here comes our interactive descent indicator. Back on profile. And now nav, you can see localizer's armed because I hit the localizer button. We're still in VNAV path, which means we're following the GPS. Okay, localizer's been captured. Click the approach button and you'll see all three autopilots came on now. Our lower flaps to 10. Okay, we've captured the glide slope. So, the heading automatically moved to 104, which is the inbound course. Now we're just descending towards runway 10 right on the ILS. Then lower our gear. And our final approach speed is 141, so we'll add 5 to that. Set this to slowest to 146. Lower another notch of flaps. So now the plane will just gently slow down while we're on the glide path. 25 on the flaps. Below 2,000, so we can set the approach altitude of 5,000. In case we have to go around. Alright, go full flaps. See on the checklist, speed brake, landing gear, full flaps. Checklist is complete. So we're just slowing to our final approach speed. Land 3, which means the auto landing is now armed. We're on localizer and glide slope with rollout and flare armed. So as we get closer, those parts will take over. It will do the flare, it will touch us down, and then rollout is what happens when we're on the runway. Ignoring the traffic. Here's 1,000 feet. We can see our radar altimeter has already been active for a little bit. We'll get some altitude calls as we come in for the landing. About 800 feet per minute, which is a little over half of our ground speed. So that is appropriate. Zoom in again. 5 miles to the runway. If you zoom in even more than 5 miles, the PMDG will actually show you the airport diagram. So you can actually use this to taxi her in. Visual glide slope looks good. After we land, we'll do the thrust reversers. We don't need a lot since we've got a nice long runway and plenty of braking power. There's our minimums.
100, 50, 30, 20, 10.
Okay, thrust reversers. That's plenty. In the rollout phase, tap the brakes. So see that turns off the auto braking. Turn that to off. Turn off the autopilot. And once again, shut off the alarm. Push the thrust forward a little bit to get out of the thrust reversers. And that's pretty much it. So, hope this is useful.